Over 80 bosses are in Remnant 2, many of which are unique and well designed. Others, not so much. Let's make a tier list ranking all of them based on the following: their design, environment, and visuals, the lore and development around them, and of course, most importantly, their core mechanics and the physical space in which you fight them. You know, the actual fight stuff itself, which will be the biggest and most important factor when putting bosses on this ranking. I will also mention that this is just combat related boss fights and encounters, so more puzzle oriented events won't be included even if they are well done. Additionally, most clips were done on Veteran, a few on Apocalypse, but the difficulty of which I record them on has no influence on rankings, as the only thing that changes is the boss's HP and the amount of damage they do. Let's start this off with a boss that everyone has fought, and probably everyone has forgotten: the Root Mantis. This is the first boss in the game, and it's pretty simple. It actually has a fair amount of attacks, but its movements are very sporadic. Some attacks are kinda telegraphed, but some just aren't at all. Combine that with it being a regular enemy later, and just the fact that you can never fight it again unless you make a new character, and this forgotten fellow goes into C tier. The Astropath is an amazing boss fight. The setup and lore around the Astropath is great. The environment and visuals are nice, and the way you start the fight is unique compared to like every other boss in the game. This is technically a gimmick kind of boss fight, but it doesn't feel like one. He's got a single melee attack, well actually two, it's just he rarely does the second lunge one, and a different assortment of projectile attacks. Then he has the more gimmicky thing, and also the more interesting one in my opinion, where he goes into the middle and he does a couple of AoE attacks. This boss is easily damageable during this time, but you always have to make sure to avoid the spinning damage zones and the big blast. If they happen to spawn a minion while he's doing this, you always have to focus on that minion first, otherwise you'll risk getting hit. Speaking of minions, the darkness move where he splits into multiple small ones and then they just kind of pop in and out of the ground in the dark is great. Then how they all recombine and prepare to do some mind AoE stuff, it's just a really good fight. It's a strong A tier, maybe even S. One of the new bosses, the Stone Warden. I personally really like this gladiator type vibes this enemy gives. It has a good use of the environment where it summons statues and they do a shield bash type thing, kind of like warriors preparing for battle. Then they get launched towards you and slam the ground doing this small AoE. The boss itself has some quick attacks and other slow moving ones. What I like about this one is its quick animation of its spin twin is actually a delay attack to get panic rollers. While the arena is small, it doesn't actually feel that crowded, and it has a good use of his mechanics and attacks to keep you moving around the area. The fight is interesting enough, and the combos and presentation the bosses present is also quite good. A boss from the newest DLC, we have Amalgam Kel'Roth and Amalgam Relis. This dynamic duo is a fun boss fight. It's one of those 2-on-1 fights that's well done. Both switch between being the center of attention, where one of the two will always stop to let the other one attack, making the audio cues and telegraphing of this very well done. That said, there are portions where both of them attack at the same time, but this is made very clear and you get plenty of time to prepare. These two offer a wide variety of quick mix-ups, AoE slams, some delay attacks to get those that panic, and a good use of the entire arena, which not too many bosses do. The phases of this boss fight are also well done. It starts off easy, then it becomes a 2-on-1, and then if you kill one early instead of killing both of them at around the same time, the remaining sibling will become enraged, and it makes the fight somehow even harder with their barrage of attacks. That said, it still feels fair, apart from one attack that isn't really well telegraphed, which is the Quad Tornado one. That's just one of those attacks you kind of have to memorize when it's coming, so since it gives no warning, that just kind of keeps it from the best of the best fights, but it's still definitely an A tier. Now I thought it'd be a good time to mention this, and that's that I'll be including aberrations and combat encounters as well in this ranking video. The first aberration we'll be putting is the Rock. This fellow spawns blocking your escape from a watery area. He's just like the standard enemy, so there's nothing really special about him or any other aberration, to be completely honest. This enemy that it is based off of though has a few amount of moves, and him blocking you into the watery area can be interesting, but that's about it. Not the worst aberration, but it's also just not that great. I honestly think D tier fits, and I will mention this, that D tier for aberrations just means they're average. It's not as bad as, like, you know, an actual boss getting D tier. The Progeny isn't anything special either. They come out of this room and try to mess you up, but their attacks are pretty basic. Modifiers can make it interesting, but not by much. It's in the same tier as the Rot. It's a D tier, which again, not bad for aberration. The Corruptor. This boss is pretty much everything you want from a world boss. Mechanically speaking, it's great. At first, you think the Guardian is the boss. Then you realize it's the ugly thing in the back. Movement around the map is required to win. Otherwise, you'll get beamed to to death. The Stone Guardian is a constant hassle, using slow moving attacks, spin to win tactics, and of course a jump AoE attack to close the distance. The Corruptor just kind of watches and shoots the beam every now and then to make you move around a little bit more, while also making you realize that he's the actual boss. So it's a good tell. Downing the Guardian also works really well, as it gives a great chance to deal weak spot damage to the real boss. But there's also these little flying dudes that you have to be cautious of as well. Nothing here really feels cheap during this fight, and the lore and build-up around this dude is also really good too. If you enjoy talking to NPCs, there's a lot to learn. Combine that with the mechanics and appearance being solid, and all this makes this boss worthy of being our first S tier. The Bloat King. This is actually the first boss I ever had glitch out on me. I literally couldn't deal or receive any damage. But upon fighting it properly, this boss is a bit annoying. It doesn't directly damage gate you from making major progression, since you can always deal damage to it, but it does have a form of damage gating, as it mitigates the damage when the orb is within, I guess, the bloat itself. And there are builds and stuff you can do to reduce this, but again, damage gating is never really a good thing. It has some interesting attacks and mechanics. The beam it shoots are pretty cool, and all this guy's children at the bottom is pretty crazy if you don't have AoE abilities or a summon that's just constantly clearing them out. And even if you do, there's pretty much always going to be some if you fall down. For the most part, if you run away though when you fall down and find a ladder, they'll never even hit you or be any sort of a problem. In orb mode, it has two attacks, big and small electricity balls, and I'm kind of just left there wishing there was a bit more to the boss's moveset other than shoot a couple projectiles, now orb and hide inside the body, reducing your damage. I think low B tier or even C tier is pretty fair. I guess saying low B with nothing in B doesn't make sense, but we'll just keep moving. Gorge is a cool fight. They pull up on you like, what's good? And then you have to face off against them in this tiny little area that makes it difficult to dodge. Most of the attacks are very quick, to the point where you almost have to pre-roll since the animation is so short. You might not end up reacting in time and it'll just hit you. The fact that this boss is in a slightly hidden hole in the ground, and then you have to climb a wall that makes it even kind of more hidden, means some people might have missed this fellow even if they got down to the bottom of the pit. So there's surrounding stuff for this fellow, and the setup is pretty interesting, and the 3 times I fought him, he seemed to always have the rat swarm. Could have just been coincidence, but maybe the modifiers are fixed. Not the most crazy thing, but this is one of the better red health enemies, so I actually think placing him in C tier opposed to D. The purple electric crystal thing of death, or the crystal elevator I think is its actual name. This isn't technically a boss, but I wanted to include these unique combat encounters since they're kind of counted as one within the game, with you getting blocked into a missed wall and everything. It's fun and on the unique side as far as combat encounters go, as you have to run around trying to kill the enemies, breaking objects like crystals to prevent getting zapped, all while trying to outrun the purple layer of electrical death. The pace feels pretty fair, and it's a well done encounter. Again, not really a boss fight, so for that reason I'm just going to put it in B tier, which feels pretty fair. Root Nexus is another one of those examples of those bosses, if you could call it that, only it does literally nothing, and it's the exact same as it was in the first game, just a stationary target where you kill enemies as you try and deal damage to it. This is an example of a bad combat encounter, and is an easy low D tier. Cancer is one of those bosses that I saw with mixed reviews from the community when doing research and everything on this tier list. I think it has some good gimmicks and mechanics. The glitch attacks are this boss's best moves, along with the fact that it can alternate between regular and glitch, which I absolutely love because they not only look cool, but they mess with people that are just panic rolling. It has a good use of AoE in close range to keep you moving and dodging around the map, and everything here feels pretty fair. Some of the attacks might feel cheap, especially in multiplayer just because the desync, but I do think this boss is well designed, and I think low A tier. Nerudian Reaper is an interesting one. It has a decent amount of breaks from the standard enemy, with multiple combo attacks, different smoke explosions, the web attack, and some orb attack. Overall, it's a cool boss visually, but as far as I know, it has absolutely no lore going for it. Not only that, but some of the boss's AoE attacks are inconsistent at best. At times you won't take damage, and sometimes you will. I've tried standing in different areas of the smoke and whatnot, it literally just appears to be random. The attacks are telegraphed, so I guess you can always just dodge it, and the fight itself is unique enough from the enemy that this is based off of. But at the same time, there are some attacks that are just there to be there. Like the web attack where he's teleporting around, it looks cool, but it poses no danger and goes away almost immediately. So it's just a free damage phase. Now getting caught in the web does slow you down, but even walking out of it is effective. You don't even have to run or roll. So it's not a bad fight. I can't help but feel it's just not polished enough to be one of the best fights in the game. The prototype is an aberration done right. It has two potential endings. The good ending, which is quite nice given you spent the last few hours trying to collect all his pieces, and the dialogue that he says is also pretty cool. Then there's the bad ending where he tries to kill you. As far as attacks go, this one feels like it's the standard enemy merged in with that one that just kind of camps back and charges a laser at you, which is nice because it makes the aberration a little bit different than just the regular enemy with more HP. It could just be the standard one's movesets though, but from what I could tell, it seemed like the two of them merge. Not much else to say, it's a solid aberration. I think it's worth a B tier. The Inverted Shambler. This one doesn't do anything special. The way you spawn it is unique and the lore behind it is nice, and I like that there are two outcomes, one with fighting it and one with not, but unlike the previous one, it's a pretty bad mini boss that doesn't really have any unique moves or attacks, so it goes into D tier. Another world boss, or bosses, and that's Faelin and Faerin. And I'm gonna group these together since they're basically the same fight. Faelin delays attacks, and Faerin is more aggressive. Pretty minor changes in the grand scheme of things. Now this boss fight, it's got some good setup and world building around it. The first phase is good. I believe the attacks are well telegraphed, the boss spawns some easy to take down orbs, he tries to pull you close in order to get some melee attacks off, good stuff. However, it can get weird on the second phase. This is because the second phase can be a little over the top. Now, we like the sword slam, even if the boss gets damage gated, because it looks cool. Once you learn that the swords literally tell you where they land with VFX, you can always watch out for them while also looking around to dodge for the orbs. All of these different visual effects and particles can feel like a bit much at times. However, you can still dodge everything, so again, it's okay. The third phase, however, is just BS. Completely just annoying that he continuously spams this one attack and is only damageable for a few seconds. Damage gating on a boss can sometimes be okay, and other times it can be bad. And in this third phase, this is a poor way of doing it. Not only that, but this section becomes swords falling, orbs raining down bullet projectile spam, and if that wasn't enough, he's just going around in two different orbs, so it's hard to tell which is the real one. So all in all, it's just this big visual mess while you can't even do any damage to the boss and you're just trying to avoid a bullet hell. I think B tier with Faelin and Faerin is fair. Just because of the third phase, it kinda just messes up the boss fight. I will put Faelin in front just because I like him more than Faerin. Gwendil the Unburnt is the worst boss fight in the entire franchise. She has one attack, and if you shoot the bomb in her hand, she has 0. The one thing that sets her apart from the regular enemy is her cluster bomb toss, and that's it. At least some of the aberrations have a unique setup or lore or anything. With Gwendil, if you find a bomb enemy while you're exploring Lost Home and they happen to be on a higher platform or roof, you've literally fought Gwendil. This boss has absolutely nothing going for it. We're going to add a row below actually, and this is just going to be F tier, where Gwendil can sit there alone. Kaeula's Shadow. A common theme with the Yeisha bosses is that they have a backstory and lore behind them. Not only that, but this boss actually uses the environment to its advantage. It's one of the few bosses that actually have a environmental type boss fight. You have to constantly look around to make sure you're not in water, and it actually has a good amount of space to fight. Its attacks are reasonable, nothing feels unfair, they come out of the water to smack you with a delay, and they have some pretty slow moving melee attacks. They also have some AoE moves like the wave, and the tentacle spawning phase is easy enough to deal with. I don't know if this is still the case, but in multiplayer it is kind of dumb how the other party members have to run over to the boss fight because they don't actually get pulled in. Regardless, this is still a solid fight with solid mechanics, worthy of like low A tier, high B tier. I think the use of water, given that it's one of the only bosses that does that, helps it a lot in its ranking. ED Alpha is an aberration. There's not too much to say about this guy. You can kind of cheese him with the elevator, just go up and then shoot him from above. It's alright. The puzzle before it with removing the stuff to open and close the doors is cool, and the enemy type that this is based off of has a decent amount of moves. Again, it's just kind of an average aberration though. A lot of people hate this boss. I've seen many people in the community across different videos and whatnot say that this is a huge letdown for the second last boss fight of the game. I personally like him. Venom is the ultimate panic roller counter, since all of his attacks have a delay. Spear, stab, swipe, throwing, spawning beam attacks, projectiles, everything has a delay. And all of them feel fair. Most of the attacks also look pretty cool, and the boss looks pretty epic overall. He seems on par with Cancer to me, or maybe just a little bit below, so we'll just place him there. Labyrinth Sentinel. Another boss that some people like, some people hate. It's a boss that you have to learn, and it's a boss that you're most likely going to die to. However, once you've learned it, it's the same every single time. The cubes rolling around is pretty cool. You can obviously evade them, or use the parts that you've broken to hide under as they roll past. The purple slow-moving cubes that shoot down in order to keep you not camping is also pretty great, combined with the mini projectiles. So this is a well-made fight, but again, it's just always the same. So I feel like middle of the road in B tier. Cinderclad Monolith. This is another gimmicky kind of boss fight. It's simple in the sense that it won't move at all, and you just have to dodge the attacks it sends at you, many of which are actually quite interesting. I haven't mentioned music before, but the music for this boss is really nice, and I love the overall design and feel. This is one of those bosses that rewards skilled and aware players, as you can constantly deal weak spot damage throughout the entire fight, either to the smaller crystals or the main one in the core if you time your shot. Its other attacks like the fire and sweeping strike are well telegraphed, and overall it's a well designed boss fight, even if it's more on the gimmicky side. It also has a few neat things that I really like spawning these little tiny stone dude and dudettes when the weak spot is exposed to kinda keep you not just getting free damage, which for whatever reason I find really cool. This was one of those fights that I just enjoy more and more every single time I fight it. Because of that, this is actually the first regular boss that I'll be giving an S tier to. The smaller version of this pot is the Charred Sentry, a simple aberration, good for farming aberration kills since it's so close to the spawn every single time you start a Forgotten Kingdom adventure mode. The attacks from this type of enemy aren't anything like super out of the ordinary, and there's nothing lore wise or location wise going for it, so we're just going to place it into D tier. A lot of these were very hard to track down, and it took me so many hours to try and record all of these. Even using Google and the wiki, most of these don't even appear on the boss or aberration category. The spawning of them is also inconsistent even if you're just farming boss mode. There are a bunch of these. For example, we have the Squalid Creeper, the Desolate Stalker, Sorrow Weaver, Death Sower, and Void Maw, which are some of them that are on Yeisha. Like pretty much all red health enemies, they're not anything super crazy or unique, and they don't really offer anything different from the standard enemy apart from having more health and the additional modifiers or abilities that can make the boss fight more interesting. This is the case for all of these bosses across all planets, so I'm just gonna put this guy in D tier, and then also just put this like little poorly made wiki screenshot that we'll know is for the other aberrations. Just to mention a few of them across all the planets, I'll just say the names out: Wretched Crawler, Ember Keeper, Arcanium Diviner, EDVA, Befouled Larva, Voidmite, Blightspawn, Abyssal Dreadnought, Mournshot, Soul Shrieker, and a few more, including some mixed with regular aberrations that you can see on this little list on the wiki, but again, some of these that I mentioned aren't even listed on the wiki. As an aside, EDVA is one of the best aberrations in the game. This is mainly because the standard version of the enemy almost never spawns, and it's got a cool invisible mechanic, an awesome design, and fairly diverse range of attacks. This is one of those enemies I wish got an actual boss version, but that's just kind of missed potential in my eyes. Barghest the Vile. This rat fits really well with the sewer environment. It's got a good setup, a solid location, you'll actually never know exactly where it'll spawn, so it's always got that surprise factor, although you can tell because it has the electricity little bloat dudes. The rat enemy itself that Barghest is based off of doesn't have too many attacks in its kit, but the rats are cool enemies overall, and I like the fact that something like this can happen. Ratatouille, what are you doing here, buddy? Okay. Oh! Wait, no. It's the event no. That's actually great. You just see him there. Which isn't related to the boss at all, but it just makes me like these guys more. So because of that, we'll put him in bottom of C. The Huntress is epic. She attacks you here and there while you're traveling through the map, which no other boss does, which is just so unique. Being able to see them jump across rooftops is just so awesome and epic. Also the fact that shooting them while they're doing this forces them to come down and fight you. Then you can wake them up to fight them normally, or use the Dreamcatcher thingy for an alt kill. All the attacks are fair and they look pretty freaking cool. The charge attack is nice, there are a couple of swipe combos, and the charging Aurora type thing is also awesome with its delay. Then you have the moveset where the boss buffs themselves with an Aurora, and then all of the attacks just kind of have a little bit more flair to them. Of course, there's also the Crow attack, which tells you exactly which one to shoot because it's an Aurora Crow instead of like an actual one. I would love to see more of these, like you encounter the boss throughout the map within the series. Because of this and just how crazy this boss fight is. Now, I don't know if this is a boss or not, I'll include it anyways, but try and go by really quick. and that's the living statue mini boss thing. You can argue it's more of an enemy, but there's also like only one of them in the game. It's got a really fun and unique gimmick where if you're not looking, it'll go towards you and then one-shot you, but then that's the only thing it does. So from a fighting perspective, it's a D tier, but from a lore and design type dealio, it's an A tier, so I'll just plop it into like low C. The Emissary, on the other hand, was a huge letdown. A mega letdown. The lore, story, and build-up for it is perfect as you're going through all of these root nexuses. Then freaking Venom comes out on the last one when you're fighting the root nexus. It's crazy. The atmosphere and environment is, again, it's just perfect. You go through this super long, well-built dungeon where I'm expecting to fight this supreme root being. Then you see the statue, and I'm thinking it's going to be a powered-up version of the regular one, showing new things while being difficult to take down. It's the exact same as the normal one, slightly different because it can have the modifiers, but it's still a huge letdown. The build-up does save it a bit, so I will be putting it in B tier, but I can't help but say it was just missed potential. The Executioner is another hidden boss. Like many Aberrations, it's pretty easy to miss, however once you enter the secret area, you'll find the boss right away. His arena, it sucks. You start in water too deep to roll, and you can try to fight him in here, but it's a lot easier to just make your way towards the stairs on the other side. Then you proceed to getting into a very narrow area. Problem with this fellow is more enemies come in to attack you, which just turns it into a gank. This Aberration's base enemy doesn't have anything like super amazing with his attack kit, it's kind of just like a 1-2 combo. So it's fairly easy to dodge their attacks, but if you get hit by it, he hits like a truck. As an aside, the entire dungeon area is cool, and it almost feels crafted like you were supposed to run away from the boss while fighting other enemies, then finally take them down near the end where you're in a little bit more of an open space. Which would work a lot better if this boss was damage immune, moved slower, and then was damageable at the end, so like maybe you had to break an object in order to be able to deal damage. So I like the concept and the area, but the Executioner and the execution itself, not great. Magister Dullian. This is a good boss fight. He's got a bunch of gross attacks from close to long range. These attacks make sure you're rotating around to avoid getting hit. The enemies he spawns during this fight don't feel overwhelming, so the balancing is well done there. Then just the fact that he picks up the enemies and uses their bodies as projectiles is great. This is one of those very different bosses design and animation wise, and pretty much everything wise. My only complaint is his one-shot attack. I tested this and it's inconsistent at best. Often it'll kill you at full HP, but sometimes it just simply won't. So I know there's the argument of just dodge it, but anytime there's a boss with a one hit, it just feels cheap. Because of that, I think that definitely keeps him from the best of the best. So maybe low A tier, high B. Mothermind. This boss is odd. All of its melee attacks are well telegraphed and fair. Kinda. The hitbox on its spin attack is buggy at times. When it leaves the pink puddles on the ground, a lot of the times it does so in a way that feels kinda cheap, but it's not the worst. Since the puddles disperse after the first slam the boss does before finally breaking the platform, it makes it so that you can run away so you're actually not blocked off from the puddles. However, damage gating the boss not once, but 3 times is silly to say the least. The rest of it is serviceable, although it is on the simple side for bosses and the moves that they can do. Another thing that I will mention is that this boss consistently had people glitch through the map, so it's one of the most buggy fights in co-op, though in solo you'll never encounter any problems. Probably the weakest of the Geisha bosses overall, so I'm actually going to put it in C tier. The Nightweaver is good. It's got good development and lore build up for it, and the fight and atmosphere with the pacing and just the way you have to go and like hunt this thing down is really well done. Its mechanics and attacks are also really good. With 2 phases, the outside and the inside, the fights are also fairly different between the two. In the first phase, you have more ranged combat with an easy to hit weak spot, whereas on the inside, you have a more creepy, sneaky approach. Both phases have enemy spawning, close-up attacks, range attacks, and a chance for you to deal some big damage. But both phases are different to fit the environment and the change of space. The Nightweaver also gets the ability to wall grab, which will one-shot you, which, as I mentioned before, not great, although this one's a little bit more fair than the previously mentioned one, as if you're far from the walls, it'll never even hit you. Her drain mechanic, on the other hand, that's BS. You can easily dodge it, but her AI makes it that she'll often just spam it repeatedly at you, and if you happen to get hit from it, she's just going to start regaining health, and that stops it from being an S tier. One simple dumb attack. She has everything going for her but that. Still, definitely a top of A tier fight. Butcher's Quarter combat encounter is a solid fight off the enemy's boss fight. This is nice being able to see the person you have to save from the very beginning of entering the dungeon. Of course, you don't have to save them, but for the purpose of this, we're going to. The enemies themselves are normal as they're just the standard Dran, and the difference in this event is instead of dealing heavy DPS to a stationary target, you have to keep the enemies from dealing any damage to the bonfire. If one happens to sneak up on you, you lose. Simple, but a nice change of pace. The setup and NPC, location, and everything is pretty good. It's definitely one of the more original encounters, but it's still just basically kill all the enemies with nothing truly special to it, so because of that, we'll just put it in C tier. The Great Hall combat encounter is easily the best type of horde boss fight in the game. The NPC dialogue is great, the setup is awesome, not only that, but the additions added to it with the Awakened King DLC are also really cool. The fight itself and how you start it is disturbing and disgusting, and that's why it's so great. The event goes full send into what it wants. You are no longer able to heal with Dragon Hearts. Now you have to heal by eating, and you can eat anything. It's deranged, but just having such a unique event allows it to be one of the most memorable compared to the rest, and it has everything you'd want from one of these combat encounters. Big enemies that make you scream and run, move around the map, protecting your food, world building, etc. I'd say A tier is pretty fair for this. Also, just very quickly, Kaeula's shadow just really doesn't feel like it fits here, so I'm just gonna like plop him down there. Speaking of horde type boss fights, here's one of the not so good ones, the Stagnant Manufactory. Now I like the time mechanic of get away from the deadly gas, but your character stopping to throw up every now and then, which can mess up jumps and combat, is just so dumb. It does have an aberration in a secret room called V Sentinel 23. This is kinda cool, but you just kinda play Ring Around the Rosie with them in order to take them down. Overall, the two combined is just kinda like a C tier. Bloodless Heir, a cool premise around the boss. The lore and the way he spawns is awesome, and it's also a unique enemy design-wise and attack-wise, which you love to see, especially for an aberration. It's got cool attacks, but unfortunately, this boss just seems to be a DPS and stamina check. This is more so because he gives literally like zero downtime between his attacks. So I never got an actual chance to appreciate the mechanics, because if you run out of stamina, his unrelenting barrage of attacks will just kill you. It's a bit of a shame that he's just a DPS check, but still, one of the best aberrations in the game. The Fractured, another one of those hidden bosses. His moveset isn't anything super amazing since he's just one of those regular stone enemies with the pickaxes. They're alive long enough to show off the full moveset, which is pretty cool since that enemy actually does have a fair amount of attacks. This fellow would rank higher in combination with the Proving Grounds simply because it's kind of one of the cooler secret ones, but because the Proving Grounds can feel kind of like BS at times, it's not going to go that high and it'll just kind of remain in D tier. This is still one of the better aberration type fights though. The Primogenitor, which I hope I'm saying right, this fight is interesting as it's one of those host parasite type bosses. It makes you have to be aware of your surroundings, though it doesn't deal a crazy amount of damage, so it's more of a gimmick fight where you just avoid ads and purple bombs. This is definitely like a B or C tier, especially since once he comes out, he just kind of just runs around and you just shoot at him, occasionally dodging his little like flop at you attack. Ripsaw. I like this guy. He hides in a shed very poorly and prepares to attack you while guarding a simulacrum. Now I know that's not always the case, but that's my headcanon and it does spawn in that shed a lot, to be fair. The attacks this guy has is just the chainsaw draw, which is fairly simple since it's literally only charge, swing, and make smoke. It also does kind of get old having to open the shed every single time for him to quote unquote sneak attack you, so we'll just put him in D tier. Another red health enemy, Dire Fiend. This one spawns at the very start of the first DLC, Awakened King, and it can prove to be difficult given the amount of mobs chasing you at the same time as fighting this. This alone makes this one a little bit better than some on the list, and I like that it's an optional fight where if you wear the right gear, you can actually talk to the NPC before they mutate, so because of that we'll just kind of put him in the higher side of the D tier. Gruin, Blade of the King, another one of those well-designed A-tier boss fights. He has a wide variety of attacks, from lunges to kicks. Not only that, but this boss also has delay attacks to mess with panic rollers that are told by audio cues. It also has quick mashups and combos, and there's also zoning attacks that last forever if you don't deal with it, or it's very brief if you just close the gap right away. The weak spot is covered at first, but it becomes easy to hit once you break it. The fact that this boss also stops to rest to let you deal damage is really cool, since this is normally one of those full throttle type of bosses. Of course, the world building and design is also great, making it worthy of that A tier. Anthenium Wet, hope I got that right. An elevator combat encounter. It's alright, waiting for the elevators kinda stinks, and the use of different enemies here is nice, with the grounded enemies on the first floor, and pretty much all of the Nerud flying enemies as you go up. Getting the secret item that spawns the Aberration Netherbound Spectre is also pretty cool. This is just an Astropath Ghost, which is a bit limited in the attack department, but it makes up for it for moving around and teleporting a bunch. Fighting this guy while not falling off can prove to be challenging. The lore and setup is also nice for this event, and while it's not the best combat encounter, it is far from the worst, so we're just gonna place it in C tier. The Corrupted Ravager. Yeisha coming through with yet again another boss that has good lore and world building. This is the only boss that builds off of the first game. Like, he literally tells you what happens, and he has one of the best alt kills out of any boss in the game. You can save the red doe where it attacks the Ravager, and from there, if you leave and go back to the spawn area, you can see the red doe and even pet it, and then life is complete. Not only that, but the mechanics for the boss are all quite well done and fair. They're telegraphed well, he has a range of close combat and ranged lunging attacks, spawning little root meatball guys, and making smoke with his tornado type of attack. It's a fun fight, his weak spot is always easy to hit, he's much easier than a lot of the other world bosses, but still an S tier. Interchangeable between which one of these two is higher ranked in my opinion. The Red Prince. Now this guy has some badass world building. Lost Ohm is all burnt and on fire because he set the city ablaze to stop a root invasion. Or at least Mudtooth said it was one of the kings, and this guy seems to fit the description. Then the way he carries himself and the fact that this fight is a spectacle is great. He has a wide variety of close range and long range attacks, stuff to close the distance, limit arena space, and the best part about it, every single attack is well telegraphed and audio cued. Everything from when you're surrounded by fire while he disappears and reappears. The use of debuffs like Curse and of course Fire just fits super well. I love the use of his spawning of projectiles and enemies. This is one of the best designed boss fights mechanically, lore, design, everything. It's just an awesome boss that honestly feels more like a world boss rather than a regular one. This dude is most definitely worthy of S tier. Quick little combat encounter ranking speedrun. First off, we have the Labyrinth one, which has nothing special lore or anything attached. Just survive a bunch of enemies, so it is just a D tier. However, I will just do a little side note that the Labyrinth enemies have one of the most unique and dynamic animations out of all of the other enemies. Seriously, just dodge them and kind of watch them, you won't be disappointed. Then there's the Root Earth with its little gank with Venom as the boss. Encounter is okay, the train yard kind of makes for a decent fighting arena, still a D tier though. And the second Ohio gang fight, well, it's less memorable than the first. You basically just protect this one area, you fight 2 root mantises. I like that this is a shout out to the first tutorial boss because, like him, nobody remembers this at all. A relatively simple boss, the Sunken Witch, with this close quarters fighting arena. The boss herself doesn't have too many moves, she literally just has spin to win, slam, and bigger slam. That's it. She can summon these pigs, and the arena can get larger depending on which wall she breaks. The aesthetic and way she moves around the map is pretty cool, but mechanically it's simple. I do like that this is one of the few bosses that is shocked by the strength of your character, with some unique voice lines compared to any other bosses. It's just a C tier. One of those destroy the target while enemies attack. We have the Befouled Altar. Appearance wise, this looks pretty sick. This thing's health pool also seems to be smaller than a lot of the other destroy the object gimmick fights like this. Still, these damage objects while enemies spawn isn't great. The Cursed Wretch is also kind of part of this fight. Now the way it spawns is grim, though I do appreciate this kind of world building from the writers and developers. However, this aberration tends to glitch out a lot, and it also has like 2 HP, so you'll one-shot it with pretty much any build. I do think as a combo they work kind of well, and we'll just put them in C tier. The Restless Spirit. This aberration has its own unique ominous tile set. Getting down is pretty easy, the location you fight it is pretty cool. Unfortunately, it doesn't have like any attacks, with its flop hit, some slow projectiles, and a couple more. The boss isn't also very menacing. It'd be cooler if you fought something more intimidating in this unique location. It's okay, but WD-109. Pretty cool location to fight this guy. You can lead them around to open doors as they pass by, which lets out more robots, making the fight more difficult. This enemy that it's based off, though, unfortunately has not that many attacks. Hold shield and swing sword. The fight itself can be pretty hectic, but again, it's a super basic enemy type. Shambler, Spectral Guardian of Nerud, is a world boss done right. After learning the additional lore for this boss, you can't help but feel sorry for them. Visually, this fight is crazy to look at, and this boss just has so many unique attacks. Ranged projectiles, lasers, hands that come out of nowhere, electricity beams that show the path before they zap, allowing you to dodge and deal damage if you pay attention. The inverted rain, also the vortex attack. I will, however, mention the vortex attack has like no tell, you kind of just have to dodge it. In fact, a couple of his attacks are like this, or rather there's just so much going on at once on the screen that you might not even notice the small visual tells. This is one of those fights where it has set dodging times and set attacking times. Attempting to attack during the boss's attacking turn will often end poorly, especially since the onslaught of attacks can easily kill you on higher difficulties. Overall, it's a fantastic boss fight, easy A tier, maybe even S. Now, Shambler, Spectral Guardian Nerud, the alt version where you use the override pin, changes the fight a lot more than I thought it would. Instead of fighting the spectral form, you are now fighting the Guardian's physical form. And if you thought the visuals were good before, they're even better now. This is probably the most world boss feeling world boss compared to all the rest. Shambler's attacks feel more aggressive yet more calculated here. Not only that, but during basically all of his attacks, the weak spot is exposed, allowing you to get the damage off if you have the skill. The story beat here also makes it look like Shambler is trying to stop you from using the override pin and blowing up Nerud. It's truly a sad, epic, and beautiful fight. The visual clutter is reduced here as he has less of those multiple attacks at once, while still having these complex moves with a simple solution to avoid, like simply dodging left or right during some of his projectile things will perfectly evade everything. I just love the way this fight is like a dance and a spectacle, and this is definitely one of those must-fight bosses. The Weld Stalker and Gnarled Archer. A cool tag team aberration fight, very easy to cheese though, and this enemy type literally just comprises of shoot. Also a tag team duo, but done kinda better. This boss is in a hidden room within a hidden room, making it a double secret boss. This adds some style points. The unfortunate thing is this boss is super easy to cheese if you don't drop down from the ledge. A cool fight if you actually do it, since this enemy has a fair amount of moves. Shrewd is basically Remnants 2. We have Shroud, one of the first bosses in the first game, at home. That kind of sums it up. He does have some distinct mechanics like swinging his bow around like a madman and the spawning of enemies. Him moving around his little platforms and they light up to tell you which one he's at is pretty cool. All of the attacks are fairly easy to dodge, and the add portion is more like target practice, though this is one of those good like first kind of fights within the game, but it's not always a guarantee. We'll just place him in C2. Seeded Corpse. One of the coolest, if not the coolest, aberration spawn encounter. The fact that they made a cutscene where he just comes up to you and there's nothing you can do is awesome. The fight itself is pretty normal. There's a bunch of other zombies trying to get you, while the zombie with the most HP also tries to get you. If this enemy type had more than just swing and jump attack, it'd rank higher. Regardless though, just because the setup is cool and it's unique, we'll put him in C2. Kel'Roth has a good amount of attacks. All of them are pretty unique and well done. Unfortunately though, it's not the most memorable world boss. I think compared to the rest, this is the one that feels the least world bossy. This is probably because the other Nerud world boss just feels way more impactful. The Losom bosses have all that power struggle and whatnot, and Yesha just has a bunch of world building and lore. Whereas Nerud, with this boss, he's kind of just there. Like, I know he's had an Astropath, but there's just something that like just makes him not fit as nice as some of the other things on Nerud. The attacks he does are solid, they're well telegraphed. He's got close swings, big chomps, slow rolls, and throwing objects at the player. Not a bad boss by any means, but I do think he's on like the lower-ish side for a world boss. Still an A tier. Kel'Roth Metaphysical, on the other hand, you could say is a lot more world bossy. The intro to the fight is disturbing, but being in the fight itself is really cool. Which, just as a side note, I don't know why Kel'Roth just pulls up on you in his spirit plane when you said you'd join him, but whatever. The weak spot changes from inside his mouth to the head, which is cool. He has a very similar charging chomp attack, but much cooler use of movement with teleporting into AoE attacks, then having these swipes and even ground pound if he wants to make it a 3-hit combo. The orb attack is a spectacle to look at during both the spinning part and the skyfall type attack. This fight just seems a lot more fleshed out, and I think it's definitely a strong S tier. Gore Carver and Thunder Piercer. Let me just say it, these guys are lame. Ripsaw does it better. I mean, it's literally the Ripsaw fight with another dude that just shoots a slow firing gun, and that's it. The lighthouse area is cool, but there's no teleportation at the end. Little Gorge, on the other hand, well, his moveset and HP is the worst out of any aberration. However, him being summoned in some fairly secret location is cool and funny at the same time. Like, you think she's making this incantation for some super strong boar mutant. Nope, just Little Gorge. He does have 6 modifiers or suffixes, which is unique to only him. Fight-wise, it's a D tier, since he literally only has 1 attack, and that's it. However, the other aspects are pretty cool, so I'm just gonna put him in S tier for the memes, but he's actually like bottom of D. The Council is an interesting event. The lore and build-up for it is cool. If you properly complete the event, it even has different endings with different members of the Council being guilty, which is cool that the devs put that time and effort in. It also leads really nicely into the first DLC, Awakened King. As far as the fight goes, the intro is badass. But their movesets, like the Aberrations, isn't anything unique. I was kinda hoping for this beautifully telegraphed fight where you have to constantly dodge, weave, and seamlessly attack. Kinda like the Sisters of Battle from Hollow Knight. But alas, because the stamina recovery rate in Remnant is so slow, the devs had to put a limit on their attack pattern in order to, make the fight fair. Combine that with the pathing of this trio being really laughably bad, and the fight is pretty average, so I'll just put it in C tier. Vault of the Formless is this fight in a factory. It's alright, my biggest issue is it has some time gating, so you just stand around waiting for the arms to rotate this pillar. Even the secret area just kinda involves you standing in one spot for like 2 minutes straight. This just strikes me as so odd because it tries to have this sense of urgency with an alarm going off and everything, but the mechanics just go directly against that. The enemies here are also just easy fodder. Even the big bad at the end is just one of the easiest enemies in the game. It's not horrible, but it's not what I'd consider a great combat encounter. Terminus Station is fairly different. The voice you hear at the beginning sounds very similar to the Custodian, which is a bit jarring since Custodian's a good guy. The mechanic of getting to the end of the train before time runs out or you die is good. Seeing the train moving and having the robots jump aboard, opening doors and everything is just solid. This is for sure one of the easier combat encounters in the game since there's not that many enemies, but I won't hold that against it since it's well made. I didn't run out the timer here the couple of times that I did do the event, so if there is a crash at the end, that'd be pretty cool, but if there isn't, I don't know. Firth, the Oathkeeper. Another one of those well done aberrations. Hidden in the cards where you actually have to try and mess up in order to get the one that looks unusual to encounter this fellow. The fight itself is like any aberration fight, since it's just a standard enemy with bloated HP and the occasional modifier that can kind of make it interesting. Still, low C tier, ID. The Custodian's Eye is a very well done boss fight. It requires you to move around the arena and go between cover in order to avoid the boss's attacks. Its weak spot is always ready to be attacked, and the cool thing about this is it's one of those bosses that remains stationary but forces you to move around, which is always a good mechanic to kind of balance out its lack of movement. Its blue bullet attack can be a bit dumb at times, especially when it removes like literally all of the cover, but apart from that, there's always cover available, and it's a fair fight with telegraphed attacks that rewards player skill, like the laser beam portion where you can deal heavy damage as long as you stay up and dodge the lasers. This is an easy A tier. Fester is a maze mini-boss. It's kind of cool that he's just hiding in the secret area, but he's just so easy to cheese because you can literally just close the door on him and use like some AoE thing. As with Aberrations, this one is based off an enemy with a very limited moveset. Combine that with the easy cheese and his ranking's not great. Bane is a cool boss. Odds are you'll miss this dude on the first time you play through the game, and even if you find them, you might not have the required item in order to start the encounter. The boss itself is pretty simple. At first, he's kind of just this chill guy that won't really attack you right away. Even after the fight starts, he's kind of just a chill guy that doesn't attack you. He pretty much only has the stomp attack and the roar. And when he does this roar, he spawns a couple of enemies. And by a couple, I mean he literally only spawns like 3. So to make up for that lack of enemies, he spawns Venom. Fight is interesting though, and I do like the setup for it. One of the better aberrations in the game, so we'll just put him in C tier. Legion. Some people hate it, some people love it. This boss makes a good use of adds, since you can't just focus on the boss the entire time. You have to quickly take out the enemies or you'll get overwhelmed. There is a blast attack you also have to watch out for, and you have to break line of sight constantly in order to not get like consumed by madness, which as far as I can tell doesn't really do much other than like limit your view of your HUD. It does go from regular damage to dealing like no damage at all, which is good and bad. Good because when you can't really deal much damage, you're forced to focus on the enemy. Damage gating or like 99% damage reduction on a boss fight is again never really good. I think the fight should more so be that when the Legion circle is red and you can shoot the portal for big damage, that stays the same, but when it's off, you can shoot the guy in the chair in order to deal more damage. However, it spawns like additional enemies or something for more risk, more reward. It's like a B tier. Dormant Nerudian Facility, a horde type of encounter with actual stakes. It's nice to see one of these timed events where you have to take down all the enemies or you die. The enemies are all these bug things, so it kind of makes sense that you have to eradicate them. What's also cool is this one has a hidden passage with a manual override that purges the entire facility. Finding this took a while, and I actually barely did it in time. The icing on top is the Aberration SD-OA7. Now, this robot isn't anything crazy, but he definitely caught myself and others off guard. The fact that he uses these missiles in a small room is something that I find funny for whatever reason, and the combo of this encounter kind of just makes it elevated to something like a C tier. Nothing crazy or special about the Mangled Atoner. They can have some interesting combos since this enemy does have a decent amount of moves, but there's no buildup or lore or anything to help its placement, so this one is unfortunately just plopped into D tier. Defiler. This is a mix of the Root Nexus and the Aberration. It's nice since the reward itself is freeing an NPC who is just a lore dump, which I know most people don't care about, but I actually do. World building again is spot on, especially since this guy tells you like literally everything about Yeisha. I do believe that forcing an Aberration to be killed instead of just the Root Nexus is also a nice change of pace. The world building does carry this encounter though, so it's just gonna go into B tier. Annihilation, the final boss of the game. The setup and world building here is great. This feels like the ultimate boss, and it's probably the most difficult fight in the game. Pretty much everything about this fight is well done. When it's flying around, you can always see its weak spot and hit it, assuming you have the skill. The first phase has a couple of attacks from orbs, quick slams, quick slashes, along with delay slashes and delay large AoE slams. The second phase uses audio cues amazingly, just like the first phase, so you know exactly when to roll. Then it changes between the two phases, which is just crazy. It's one of the most fun and rewarding bosses to fight, especially if you're dodging everything. The only negative thing I have to say is that in multiplayer, the amount of orbs it spawns can be unfair. Even in single player, it can be a little bit unfair too, because depending on what weapon you're using, you're not going to be able to break them all. You can normally dodge them, but sometimes the way they spawn, especially in multiplayer, makes it impossible to dodge due to the delay between fires and the way the targeting works. Oftentimes, instead of just the 2 sets of orbs going at you, you'll have all 4 sets of orbs from like 2-player multiplayer all coming at you. So even if you perfectly dodge the first set, the second, third, or even fourth will still hit you just because the way the timing does. It's still an S tier fight, though I do wish they would have like not had that oversight for it. Definitely one of those must-fight bosses. From an amazing boss to a horrible one. Mantigoria is the worst aberration in the game, simply because it flies out of range 99% of the time. If you're lucky and it gets close and you have a broken build, it's GG. The fight takes like 2 seconds, but for the average player playing the game with like an average build, this boss fight takes forever to kill. I encountered this thing again to see if this boss has changed, you know, like if its health was reduced or something since the first time I fought it when the game released, and it hasn't. It still flies miles away, where even long range weapons like bows deal no damage at all. It's not difficult in any way, but it also doesn't attack you in any way, so it's just poorly designed and not even a fight. This is the only other one that is going in F tier. The Stonewing Lurker is an example of a winged mini-boss that is well done. It has a pretty sad story attached to it, and the enemy this mini-boss is based off of has a good range of projectile and close-up attacks, so it makes it much more enjoyable to fight. So I will put this dude in low B, high C tier. Wraith Liege is hidden in this awesome courtyard hedgemate. Not only does the entire area look awesome, but the little specter versions of him also look really cool, and they can give you a little spook as you're going through the maze. It's unfortunately just a red health aberration at the end of the day, but this is one of the better ones, since the standard enemy doesn't have clones that fight with it, or at least not as many clones that fight with it, or a sick location that they guard. I'm just going to place this thing higher than it actually should, but I just love the location he's in, so we're putting him in B tier. Astro Harvester is another case of those aberrations in a hidden area. The enemy type that it's based off of has a good amount of attacks, and depending on the modifiers, it can get some interesting fights against this fellow. So they go into C tier. At first, I did not like Alepsis Taura. After learning the fight, I like it. I really like this boss. Not only was this boss built up in both of the original Nerude maps, or world boss versions, I should say, it's also the focus of the third map used in the Dark Horizon DLC. So from a lore point, it's perfect. From a design point, I mean, he's a black orb with triangles, so he doesn't have much going for him. But the attacks, the attacks are solid. Quick sound cued ones, slow moving ones great for dealing damage, big AoE ones, even fake out ones where you think something will hit you but it actually won't, so it's just there for you to waste stamina, so the following attack does hit you. He's also got these weird tentacles that smack you, projectiles, a bunch of different stuff. It's got pretty much everything you'd want from a world boss. Though I will admit, this guy is again more on the gimmicky side, especially for a world boss. The only problem I have is that this is one of those bosses where there's a couple of attacks that just don't have a purpose, like the floating triangles he spawns. As far as I can tell, you cannot break them. I have done so much damage to them and they never break, so they're just a visual distraction. That's about it. They do kind of seem to slow you down when you walk through them, though this is inconsistent at best. Regardless, this is still a solid A tier, even S tier fight. Bastion is a secret boss of the Labyrinth. I know, shocker. For an aberration, this one has a large moveset since it's based off an enemy with a good amount of attacks. It has delay attacks, quick attacks, closing the distance, projectiles, both large and small, and the boss honestly is a lot of fun to fight. It's actually more fun than fighting a few of the actual bosses. For this reason, they're going into B tier. Wither. This one is pretty average. I like that it spawns out of a chest, and it's a nice little surprise gotcha aberration, but you can take it down before it does literally anything once you know where they spawn, and the enemy itself is a pushover. So D tier. Abomination is an abomination of a boss fight. Alright, I'm kidding. It has a few additional attacks compared to its more basic counterpart, like the one flying move where he copies the floating zombie enemy and then he flings these purple energy grates at you. It also has the thing where he runs around leaving these little mines, and he'll sometimes fling little bombs at you when attacking you, which is pretty cool. I also like the fact that this boss runs away in order to cover up its weak points again. But being completely honest, this boss has zero interesting patterns. It's also super easy to miss these mechanics because its health pool is kind of on the lower side. The only reason I actually saw these is because I was literally micro-analyzing every single boss and just kind of letting them do their thing while dodging. So if you're just actually fighting the boss normally, odds are you never even see this stuff. Still, I think they're worthy of C tier. Lydusa is a well-done world boss. The lore and story around the character is great. Mechanically speaking, this world boss is a little bit more on the gimmicky side, especially with the last phase or final stand, but it's a still entertaining boss fight to do. Audio cues are on point, it's got AoE that don't do anything until the projectile hits them, which causes them to explode, making you have to be aware of your surroundings. The Beyblade attack is pretty interesting, along with the head smack attack. Final phase of the walls coming at you while you kind of just roll and shoot at her is okay. It can last a long time, but that's more so dependent on the player. And the final stand DPS check is okay, but it can be annoying if you happen to have a weak build, because you're just going to be screwed, which stinks. I like the world boss, but at the same time I feel like Lydusa is kind of in the same boat as Tel'Rotha, where they're kind of tied for being the weakest world boss, if that makes sense. The one true king. A worthy world boss. This guy has plenty of build-up and an expansive world to explore, especially in the one-shot version. Pretty much every single NPC mentions this character, so finally getting to him is a pretty epic moment. This is also the grandest of the Lost Zone world bosses, and he's deserving of the title One True King. There are a wide range of attacks for this dude, forcing you to pay attention to your surroundings during this fight, but he even says so. Everything feels fair. There are literally no BS attacks. When he teleports, you have plenty of time to find and dodge him. The beam breath is also easy to avoid. He does have that big AoE attack where he's immune, though this is one of those better damage immune phases. His big shockwave attacks are also well telegraphed, and his other moves like stomps keep things interesting. Perhaps some of his attacks are a little bit on the too slow side of things. Like, I get their delay attacks to try and catch panic rollers, but they're so slow that if you just spam rolls, you'll still dodge it anyway. I still love this boss though, easy S tier. Last on the list, but not least, we have the Protector of the Grove. Now this is the one and only boss that I've never fought, and I never will fight simply because I like the little does too much. That being said, the entire area is just perfect. It's a beautiful little peaceful area where you can get an amazing necklace, and then if you actually happen to kill all the doe, the Protector spawns. The deer has some unique mechanics since the base ones just run around, with its unique attacks like charge, headbutt, and some electricity orb attacks too. So as far as world building goes, this boss is actually like an S tier, for an aberration that is, and like a B tier as far as a mini boss goes. I kind of want to put them top of A tier, but that's a little bit too biased, so I think I'll just put them like high up in B tier. And there's every combat encounter and boss ranked in Remnant 2.